A white police officer takes the stand and lies about a black woman, completely unaware that she's a high-ranking special operations officer and a former U.S. Navy veteran. "You underestimated me, Officer Malloy, but the truth always finds its way into the light." What could bring an entire courtroom to a stunned silence? A confident cop steps onto the witness stand, accusing a black woman of assaulting him, resisting arrest, even attempting to grab his firearm. His uniform? Spotless. His testimony? Clear and composed. His story? Seemed airtight until the woman stood and told her side. Who is she? And how, with just a few words, did she silence a police officer, a jury, a judge, and the entire room? This isn't just a trial. This is the truth buried beneath bias. A woman once silenced, dragged to the bottom, now standing, speaking, and making the entire system finally listen. The morning at Millstone County Courthouse began with a strange kind of silence. Not the silence of courtroom decorum, but something tighter, compressed, as if the entire room were holding its breath, bracing for an eruption. Early sunlight sliced through the tall windows, casting pale gold streaks across the dark wooden floor. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, curious locals, a few off-duty officers seated quietly in the back row, and in the center of it all, her. Alana Brooks sat quietly at the defense table. No folded arms, no slouched shoulders, no tension or visible defense. She simply sat upright, hands loosely clasped in front of her, eyes focused forward, not searching for sympathy, not avoiding eye contact. But there was something about her that unsettled people when they looked too long. They couldn't tell what she was thinking. No one could guess what she was about to do. And it was that calm that unnerved them most. Her face showed no emotion, but it wasn't cold. It was a FaceTime, couldn't dull, but experience had carved deep brown skin, steady eyes, and features sharpened by discipline, by years, and by the fire of command. Her hair was tied back, her face bare, her clothes simple, and yet everything she wasn't trying to project was exactly what made her impossible to ignore. Across the room, Officer Derek Malloy sat with the familiar posture of someone who believed he was in control. Back, leaning comfortably against his chair, arms crossed over his chest, eyes sweeping the room like it already belonged to him. His police uniform was sharply pressed, his nameplate gleaming under the ceiling lights. He gave a faint smirk when his gaze met. Alana's a smile laced with both contempt and quiet triumph. Beside her, Julian Hayes, a young defense attorney, shuffled papers with a slight tremble in his hands. He was only a few years into the profession, and this was his first time handling a case in a courtroom this packed. But the woman sitting next to him, the one he was representing, didn't resemble any client he'd worked with before. She didn't speak much. She showed no emotion. And yet, there was something about her that commanded attention, even in silence. The sound of a gavel cracked through the room. Judge Willard Stone entered his pace, slow but deliberate. An older man with silver hair and a stern expression, he'd presided over more high-pressure trials than he could count. But something about this one had attention differently. Maybe it was Malloy's eyes. Maybe it was the unreadable stillness of the woman sitting across from him. The court clerk called out, "Case of the State versus Alana Brooks." Julian stood up, doing his best to keep his voice steady. "Your Honor, the defense is ready." The judge gave a nod, then shifted his gaze to the prosecution. "Officer Malloy, please take the stand." Derek Malloy rose as if he'd rehearsed this scene 100 times. He straightened his collar and walked to the witness stand with the confident steps of a man who believed the courtroom was his stage. He stopped, swore in, and took a seat, eyes locked on Alana. That night, I was on patrol when I spotted the defendant standing outside a closed storefront. When I asked what she was doing there, she became aggressive. She refused to show ID, raised her voice, and when I attempted to de-escalate the situation, she assaulted me. Malloy paused, briefly, pretending to steady his breath, then looked directly at the jury. She struck me in the chest and then attempted to grab my weapon. I had no choice but to risk her safety. A few murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Julian glanced at Alana. She didn't move, still sitting upright, hands gently clasped on the table, eyes fixed forward. But if you looked closely, you'd see those weren't the eyes of someone on trial. They were the eyes of someone waiting for her turn to step into the arena. When Officer Malloy finished his testimony, he gave a small nod toward the jury, the kind that says, "That's it. You can trust me now." A few seconds of silence followed. Prosecutor Thomas Reeve offered no further questions. He simply glanced at the judge and gave a subtle nod. "The prosecution rests, Your Honor." Judge Stone turned toward the defense, his voice steady and deliberate. "Miss Brooks, your turn." Alana stood. No prompting, no hesitation. She walked to the witness stand, not fast, not slow, but with each step measured like it had already been mapped. As she took her seat, something in the room shifted, like the air tightened. No one spoke. No one moved. Every eye locked onto one thing: the black woman who had just sat in the seat where the system expected her to tremble, to explain, to beg. But she did none of that. Prosecutor Reeve stepped forward first, opening with a short question meant to establish control. "Miss Brooks, can you explain your action the night in question?" Alana tilted her head slightly, eyes fixed on him. "I can. But before I do, I need to make one thing clear. Officer Malloy's testimony is not just inaccurate. It's a deliberate distortion of the truth." A ripple moved through the courtroom. Reeve pressed his lips together. "Do you have evidence to support that claim?" "The truth always finds its way out, sir. And today, I'm letting it speak for itself." The judge motioned for the examination to continue. Reeve stepped back, but his eyes never left her. Alana began to speak, her voice low and unhurried, but every word seemed to strike the wooden walls and echo back, spreading across the courtroom like ripples in still water. "That night, I was leaving a friend's house. I stopped on the sidewalk near the corner of Magnolia and 5th to check directions. I wasn't doing anything wrong. I wasn't loud. I wasn't blocking anyone. I was standing still, literally on a sidewalk. That's when Officer Malloy approached. He shined a flashlight directly into my face and asked what I was doing there, in a tone that was anything but polite. I told him I was checking my GPS. He demanded ID. I asked why, because I know my rights, and I knew I hadn't broken any laws. He didn't explain. He just raised his voice and said I was being uncooperative. I told him I wasn't causing any trouble, but before I did anything else, he grabbed my arm. Reeve, arms crossed, cut in. "You're saying Officer Malloy assaulted you first?" "Yes." He gripped my wrist hard, and when I said let go, he tightened it. Then he said something I'll never forget. Alana lifted her chin, her eyes scanning the courtroom before settling on the judge. He said, "Women like you need to learn how to obey." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Someone swore under their breath. Several people turned to look at Malloy. Judge Stone banged his gavel, calling for order. Reeve, visibly rattled, pushed forward. "Do you have any proof of that statement?" "Number." "Because his body cam that night coincidentally malfunctioned. Isn't that right, Officer Malloy?" Alana turned, locking eyes with him. Malloy looked away, his breathing shallow like he'd just swallowed something bitter and burning. Reeve exhaled tightly. Setting the camera aside. "What happened next?" "He accused me of resisting, though I never did. When I pulled my arm away, I was shoved hard into the patrol car. No explanation, no warning, just force and power." Reeve asked, "Did you fight back?" I said clearly, "I do not consent to being touched. I didn't fight. I didn't threaten." The courtroom fell silent. No one wrote anything down. No one moved. Even the hum of the air conditioner felt like it had stopped. Reeve stepped back. At the defense table, Julian watched her intently, every word like a step forward into territory no one else had dared tread. And Alana? She never raised her voice. She didn't need to. She simply told the truth calmly, clearly, and with such precision that the entire courtroom began to feel a chill in their spine. Julian Hayes remained seated at the defense table, but his eyes didn't leave the witness stand for a single second. He knew this moment was coming, and he knew he couldn't afford to miss it. As soon as Alana finished speaking, the courtroom fell into a silence so sharp it felt like a verdict had just been delivered not for the defendant, but for the entire system sitting on the other side of the scales. Prosecutor Reeve straightened his sleeves, trying to regain control. But when he looked into Judge Stone's eyes, he realized that grip was slipping. The judge leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but firm. "Counselor Hayes, if the defense has specific evidence, now would be the time to present it." Julian rose. Not hastily, not theatrically. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small USB drive, raising it just high enough for the jury to see. "Your Honor, the defense would like to submit a video recorded by a bystander on the night of the incident. The footage will clarify exactly what transpired." Reeve immediately objected. "Your Honor, this evidence was never submitted during discovery. Presenting it now is inadmissible." Judge Stone tapped his gavel gently, his tone measured but unwavering. "The court will allow it. I want to see and hear everything." A quiet yet urgent stir rippled through the courtroom. The court clerk inserted the USB into the display system. The screen behind the witness stand lit up. The lights dimmed, and the video began to play. The angle was off-center, the footage slightly shaky, but the audio was perfectly clear. "Don't make this harder than it has to be, ma'am." It was Malloy's voice, sharp and commanding. In the frame, he could be seen gripping Alana's wrist, forcing her against the white patrol car. His other hand hovered near his holstered gun. But she wasn't resisting. "I'm not resisting. Let go of me." Alana's voice rang out, calm and steady. There were a few audible gasps from the gallery. Jurors leaned forward in unison, eyes fixed on the screen. And then, the line came slicing through the air like a blade. "Women like you don't have the right to question me." The courtroom exploded in stunned silence. Some people inhaled sharply, others clenched their armrests. Malloy, who had worn a smug grin minutes earlier, was now frozen. His face had gone pale. Lips tight, eyes staring forward but entirely unfocused. Judge Stone banged his gavel repeatedly. "Order. I demand order in this courtroom." Julian stood still as the glow of the screen illuminated his face. He said nothing more. He didn't need to. The video had spoken for itself. Reeve turned toward Malloy. The officer swallowed hard. His hands rested on the table, but his fingers were trembling. The air in the courtroom had thickened. Jurors, who moments ago had wavered, now exchanged glances filled with unease. One juror looked at Malloy, then at Alana, a gaze that had clearly shifted. Julian returned to his seat beside Alana. He said nothing, but she tilted her head slightly, looked at him, and said one sentence just enough to pierce the emotional core of everyone listening. "That's just a crack. But the wall is about to fall." As the video ended, the courtroom lights flickered back on, but the air remained as heavy as when it was dark. No one moved, no one spoke. Questions began to surface not on paper, but in people's eyes. If she didn't resist, if Malloy had lied, then who exactly was this woman? Judge Stone glanced at the clock, then tapped his gavel. "This court is adjourned. We will reconvene at 9 a.m. tomorrow." The room stirred slowly. People rose to their feet and began whispering quietly. Some stole discreet glances at Alana. Others looked toward Malloy, whose earlier confidence had completely vanished. Julian stood, closed his folder, then turned to her. "If there's something you're not telling me, now's the time. I'm your defense, Alana, but I need to know exactly who I'm defending." Alana didn't answer immediately. She stood, her eyes drifting away from the courtroom, and said softly, "Come to my house tonight, alone. I'll show you everything." Alana's home sat at the edge of town, tucked behind a row of weathered oak trees and a gravel path. Nothing about it stood out. No sign suggested this was the home of someone who had once walked through war zones. But inside, the truth lived in quiet defiance. A framed photo young Alana in navy dress blues, arm draped around an older man in uniform, a neatly folded American flag in a glass case, a shelf lined with books on tactics, survival, combat psychology. Julian stood still in the living room as Alana opened a small cabinet and pulled out a dark brown leather folder. She placed it on the table in front of him without a word. "What is this?" "My history," she said simply. "What I once was, and still am, whether people see it or not." Julian opened the folder. His eyes moved quickly. Discharge papers, medals, combat reports, commendation letters. Then he froze. "You were a lieutenant commander in a Navy SEAL team? 20 years, 4 deployments, 1 injury, 2 hostage extractions. One time stuck behind enemy lines for 36 hours. And all I got for it here," she locked eyes with him, "was a ride in the back of a patrol car for standing on a sidewalk and being me." Julian sat down. His hands trembled not from fear, but from sheer disbelief. Everything he had witnessed in court, the stillness, the unwavering stare, the precision in her wordsit, all made sense now. "Are you planning to reveal this in court?" "Not yet, but when the moment is right, I will, because this isn't just about me." "What do you mean?" "Malloy isn't alone. He's just the face of something that's been around too long. If I only go after him, I'm treating the symptom. But if I use my truth, to drag the entire system into the light, then it means something." Julian nodded. For the first time during the entire trial, something close to awe flickered in his eyes. "So tomorrow, we're not just putting a man on trial." "No," Alana said, rising to her feet and walking toward the folded flag in the case. "Tomorrow, we're forcing the system to look itself in the mirror." She placed her hand on the flag. And for the first time, Julian saw a different kind of fire in her eyes, not rage, not contempt, but the iron will of someone forged in trenches, returning to fight again. This time, on a different battlefield. The next morning, the courtroom was more crowded than ever. News of the video had spread faster than the headlines. And now, the people weren't just curious, they were waiting. The stares weren't about intrigue anymore. They were about expectation. The air in the room felt compressed, as if something invisible was ready to explode at any second. Malloy sat at the plaintiff's table, shoulders hunched, fingers laced tightly, avoiding everyone's gaze. The officers who had filled the back row just days before were now fewer in number, and those who remained no longer sat shoulder to shoulder, Julian noticed, and he knew the moment had come. Judge Stone entered and struck the gavel to open the morning session, his voice slow and deliberate. "Court is back in session. Does the defense have additional evidence?" Julian stood. No briefcase, no legal binder, just a single folder in his hand. "Your Honor, the defense submits new evidence regarding Officer Derek Malloy's personnel file." Reeve jumped to his feet. "Objection. This document was not previously submitted for discovery." "It was uncovered following last night's video release," Julian replied, his eyes never leaving the judge, "and it cannot be ignored." Judge Stone looked at Julian, then turned to Reeve. "Objection overruled. Proceed, Mr. Hayes." Julian stepped forward, handed copies to the jury, then turned back to face the courtroom, now so quiet you could almost hear the pulse of the moment. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you have before you is an internal record from the Millstone Police Department detailing Officer Malloy's conduct over the last 7 years. It includes a total of 12 filed complaints, ranging from excessive force to unjustified stops and searches, and most notably, at least 5 of those involved black individuals. All were handled quietly internally and then filed away with no further investigation. There was no gasp, no dramatic outburst. Just a slow-building wave of discomfort, a shift in energy as jurors leaned forward, reporters scribbled faster, and the back row of uniformed officers avoided each other's eyes. Malloy sat frozen, jaw clenched, his carefully maintained facade cracking in real time. Julian continued, voice steady. "This trial began as an isolated accusation. But what it has revealed is a pattern not just of misconduct, but of silence. of systems choosing convenience over accountability. This isn't just about one night on a sidewalk. This is about every moment that came before it, and every person who walked away without justice. He paused, looked toward Alana. She hadn't moved. She didn't need to. The system was already shifting, and it was shifting because she stayed exactly where she was. Julian turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, we rest our case." A juror furrowed his brow. Another turned toward Malloy, no longer able to hold on to the detachment they'd started with. "This isn't a one-time mistake," Julian continued, his voice beginning to rise. "This is a pattern, a habit, a mechanism, and a system that has allowed it to continue by doing nothing." Reeve interjected. "That file doesn't prove what happened that night." Julian spun back. "It proves that Malloy isn't a good cop who made a rare misstep. He's someone who's been warned, flagged, documented, but never held accountable. And on that night, when he saw a black woman standing alone on a sidewalk, he didn't see a citizen. He saw a target." He turned to Alana. "And he had no idea. She once led a Navy SEAL operations unit." The courtroom froze. Several pens halted mid-note. Judge Stone leaned forward. "Miss Brooks, do you confirm your counsel's statement?" Alana rose, no invitation needed. She stepped to the center of the courtroom, turned to face the jury, and spoke with a voice that wasn't loud, but carried like command steel. "I am Alana Brooks, Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy SEALs, retired after 20 years of service. I've served in combat zones in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've led hostage rescue missions. I know how to identify a threat. And I knew I was not a threat that night. But to him and to the system that built him, I was something to be subdued." She turned to look directly at Malloy. "And when I didn't lower my eyes, he tightened his grip on my wrist." Then she turned back to the jury. "But I'm not here for revenge. I'm here to remind them, those who have done what he did, and those who've looked away, that there is a line. And today, we are standing on that line." No one in the room moved. Reeve didn't rise again. Malloy sat hunched, his hands gripping the edge of the table, as if it were the only thing keeping him from collapsing. Julian stepped forward, his voice low, barely above a whisper, but cutting through the silence like a blade. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is no longer about one officer's misconduct. This is a test of whether the system is willing to look itself in the mirror." After Alana finished her testimony, the courtroom fell into a strange kind of quiet, not silence, but a particular stillness, like the moment after a storm has passed. When no one dares to breathe because they don't yet know what remains, the jury was instructed to deliberate. No one in the courtroom moved. Not out of curiosity, but because no one wanted to walk away from what felt like a historical moment in the making. Julian sat down, hands clasped. Alana didn't speak. She simply stared forward at the judge's bench knot, like someone awaiting judgment, but like someone waiting to see if a broken system still had the courage to right itself. 39 minutes later, the jury returned. All eyes turned to the forewoman, a middle-aged woman, whose face was solemn, though something in her eyes had softened over the course of the trial. Judge Stone leaned in, his voice carrying through the room that now held its collective breath. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Please read the verdict." The woman unfolded the paper, her voice steady, but bearing a weight all its own. "We, the jury in the case of the State versus Alana Brooks, find the defendant not guilty on all counts." A collective exhale rippled through the courtroom. Some covered their mouths in disbelief. Julian closed his eyes for a brief moment, then turned to Alana. She didn't react in any overt way, just nodded slightly, as if the verdict had only confirmed what she already knew. But the forewoman wasn't done. "Additionally, we recommend that the court open a formal investigation into the misconduct, abuse of authority, and perjury committed by Officer Derek Malloy." Malloy dropped his head. Reeve remained still. He didn't object. He didn't reach for his laptop. They both knew this was the end of the line. Judge Stone nodded slowly, his tone low and resolute. The court acknowledges the jury's recommendation. A legal inquiry will proceed accordingly. This session is now adjourned. No one stood up right away. Alana stepped away from the defendant's table as if she were leaving a trench knot in haste, not in triumph, but with each step carrying weight. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had already gathered. Cameras, microphones, voices calling her name like a crashing tide. But Alana paused only once, turned toward the sea of lenses pointed her way, and spoke not as a victor, but as someone beginning something far greater. I'm not standing here just because I was acquitted. I'm standing here for everyone who's ever been treated unfairly with no one to speak up for them. I'm standing here to tell those who've been silenced by injustice that the truth, if you hold on to it, protect it, and don't let it be twisted, will one day speak for you. Julian stood behind her, watching. He didn't need to say anything. She had spoken for them all. Applause slowly rose not from the press, but from the people. From those who had just witnessed the truth laid bare not with weapons, but with the courage of one woman standing alone. Months later, Derek Malloy was suspended and charged with perjury and abuse of power. The Millstone Police Department was forced to reopen internal investigations long buried. People who had once remained silent began to speak up, and the name Alana Brooks appeared everywhere not as a hero, but as a symbol of silence that speaks, and of truth that knows how to wait. A week after the trial, the air had turned crisp. Millstone entered early autumn. Leaves began to change color, and everything seemed to slow down except the echoes of what had happened. People still whispered Alana Brooks's name in coffee shops, on local forums, and in editorial columns. But Alana herself had vanished from public view. She had quietly left town on an afternoon no one noticed, just like the way she first walked into that courtroom without fanfare, without needing praise. Her house remained. The flag still lay folded in its glass case, the old photos still stood on the table, but the space she left behind in the public's consciousness couldn't be filled. No one looked at Officer Malloy the same way again. More importantly, no one looked at black women the same anymore. People started to ask questions, started to listen, started to re-examine things they thought had always been right. Julian received a handwritten letter from Alana, no return address. The handwriting was firm, brief. Thank you for believing me when the system didn't. But I don't need to be called a hero. I just wanted a courtroom where the truth didn't lose. He folded the letter, placed it in the inner pocket of his jacket, and sat silently for a long while in his office. From that day on, he began taking the cases he used to avoid the ones with no voice, no money, but with truth and faith. Alana never returned to that town, but she started appearing in other places, not on television, not with a title, but in quiet training rooms for young women, in town hall talks with black communities, in hushed conversations between survivors and those still searching for a reason to rise. She didn't tell her story as a triumph, but as a reminder that every time you're dismissed, overlooked, silenced, you're standing at the threshold of a truth. And if you have the courage to cross it, you can change more than just a verdict. Her story was never made into a movie. No standing ovations, no plaques on the wall. But it lived in the eyes of those who once couldn't look up, in the silence of those who once thought they had no voice, and in the quiet nods of those who once doubted, now only able to say one thing when they speak of her. We were wrong about her. And that's when justice truly begins.